Hello and welcome to another edition of Foreign Dispatches on Channels Television, the program that takes you around the globe in 25 minutes. I'm Teniola Shobowale. On the program this week, it's back to school for many children across Europe amid COVID-19 measures. Plus, Sudan's government signs peace deal with rebel groups. And then history is made with the first official flight from Israel to the United Arab Emirates. After months of online learning due to the coronavirus pandemic, children are finally back to school across Europe. Facing an increase in coronavirus cases, officials in France, Britain, Russia and Spain have introduced measures to keep children safe whilst they learn.
Face masks, hand cleansing stations, social distancing has become the new normal in schools across Europe. In France, students aged over 11 years must wear masks at all times, including indoors. Schools must also limit the mixing of class groups and ventilate and disinfect classrooms. In kindergarten, children within the same class group do not need to observe social distancing. Primary schools can split up classes into groups of 8 to 15 pupils who alternate between half days in class and learning from home. But for secondary schools, all students need to attend school at least a few days a week. On Tuesday, September the 1st, all students went back to their classes under new coronavirus measures in Britain, which includes one-way systems in the buildings and class bubbles to encourage children to social distance.
Done our very best to make sure that we've kept them at our level, so when the children came back today, as far as possible they were coming back to the school that they left in March. Their physical safety and their emotional well-being has always been our top priority. That's heightened now. So lots of things are in place, increased hand washing, increased cleaning throughout the day. The children are sitting in rows rather than at tables. They've all got their own pencil cases. Our teachers have all been trained. We've all done trauma-informed schools training. So when the children come back, we're going to give them time to explore how they're feeling about the lockdown and now coming back to school, recognising that some are very anxious, so that we're taking time out of our school day to make sure that they recognise they're physically safe, but we're also checking that they're emotionally well and ready to learn. But as much as we can, keeping that behind the scenes so the children can come back to school and start their learning again.
Primary schools had reopened in England on June the 1st, starting with some year groups. All years are now back full-time for the new school year across the country.
I like that I see my friends, and also whenever you're at home, you don't really understand as much whenever you're at school.
Lots of good things about being back at school, getting to see my friends and just getting to play with my mates again.
Rules on face masks and other protective equipment differ across the country. Secondary students in England have to wear face coverings in corridors and communal areas, but not in classrooms. As Russia's coronavirus cases crossed the 1 million mark on September the 1st, schools and educational institutions reopened across the country. Classroom times and breaks are staggered to prevent overcrowding in common areas. Temperature checks will be carried out at school, and students with flu-like symptoms will be isolated. Children are advised to wear masks, although it's not compulsory. Staff are expected to wear masks all the time, unless explaining new material or standing at a safe distance from students. Online education will not be offered as an alternative. And in Spain, with the new academic year set to start in the first 3 weeks of September, and Spain registering the highest number of COVID-19 cases in Western Europe, officials have sought to calm fears that schools could turn into centers for mass infection. Students must wash their hands at least 5 times a day. Social distancing must be observed, except among members of a bubble, a small group of children who must distance from members of other bubbles.
The normal thing to do would be to have both classes working together in the space, but we will create 2 bubbles. Half will be on one side and the other half in the other space. But every week we will swap the students to the opposite side so they can be stimulated by different experiences.
Temperature checks will also be carried out each morning at school or at home. School attendance is mandatory, as are face masks in class for children aged 6 and over.
In Wuhan, ground zero for the COVID-19 pandemic and the Chinese city hardest hit by the coronavirus, schools have also reopened. Concerned about the students' psychological health after a long time of COVID-19 lockdown, some schools in the region prepared psychological counseling to help them adapt to the new normal quickly.
In Wuhan city of central China's Hubei province, which used to be worst hit by COVID-19, nearly 1.4 million students returned to schools September the 1st. Many of them have been missing school for more than 8 months. Prior to the reopening day, faculties of the city schools carried out trainings and drills to ensure safety and epidemic prevention for the incoming students. Some schools prepared psychological counseling services to help the students adapt to the post-COVID-19 new normals.
Opening a psychological counseling class is because students did not come back to school for a long time, and right now we are in a post-epidemic era. We want to help them make psychological adjustments which will clear out their gloomy moods caused by the pandemic, overcome anxiety of school reopening and release emotional stress.
On their first day of return, many students said they were excited about the reunion.
I'm very thrilled and excited. I hope that in the new semester, our study can go smoothly and safely amidst the epidemic.
School life is almost the same as before the outbreak, but there are still some small differences. Students have to wash their hands more frequently, windows are left open for longer periods of time, and disinfection is routinely done. The central Chinese city, where the COVID-19 pandemic is believed to have originated, was locked down for more than 2 months from late January. The city's death toll of 3,869 accounts for more than 80% of China's total. Wuhan has been steadily returning to normal since April, when the lockdown was lifted, and it has not reported any new local transmissions of the coronavirus since May 18th.
Let's shift over to the United States now for developments following the police shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin. This week, U.S. President Donald Trump visited Kenosha not to comfort the family of Blake, but to express support for law enforcement in a city rocked by civil unrest.
With the United States polarized over issues of racial injustice and police use of force, U.S. President Donald Trump called for law and order on a visit to Kenosha, the latest city rocked by protests following the police shooting of a black man. President Trump denied that there were problems of systemic racism within U.S. law enforcement, instead blaming recent incidents on bad apples or good cops who he says choke in decisive moments.
To stop the political violence, we must also confront the radical ideology that includes this violence. Reckless, far-left politicians continue to push the destructive message that our nation and our law enforcement are oppressive or racist. They'll throw out any word that comes to them. We have to condemn the dangerous anti-police rhetoric. It's getting more and more. It's very unfair. You have some bad apples, we all know that, and those will be taken care of through the system. And nobody's going to be easy on them either. And you have people that choke. They're under tremendous, I said it yesterday, I said it last night. They're under tremendous pressure. And they may be there for 15 years and have a spotless record, and all of a sudden they're faced with a decision. They have a quarter of a second to make a decision. And if they make a wrong decision, one way or the other, they're either dead or they're in big trouble. And people have to understand that. They choke sometimes.
The Republican president did not visit Jacob Blake, who was paralyzed from the waist down after a white police officer fired at his back 7 times on August 23rd, nor his family, because they had wanted lawyers present. Instead, President Trump promised to rebuild Kenosha and provide more federal spending to Wisconsin. President Trump also visited a burnt-out furniture store that was destroyed in the upheaval and then a makeshift command center to praise National Guard troops who were called in to reinforce local police after several nights of peaceful protests gave way to looting, arson and gunfire. His visit to Kenosha went ahead despite appeals from the Democratic mayor and governor to stay away, as they said it was not a good time for the president to visit.
As President Donald Trump visited Kenosha, Wisconsin to express support for law enforcement, civil rights leader Jesse Jackson and the family of Jacob Blake held a Justice for Blake community event, calling for the indictment of the officer that shot Blake and peace and healing for local residents.
On the same day as President Donald Trump's visit to Kenosha, in the wake of civil unrest following the shooting of Jacob Blake, Reverend Jesse Jackson paid a visit to Blake's family during a community event. Both the Blake family and Jackson said they were hosting the event for justice, as well as giving the chance for the community to heal. It was on Sunday, August 23rd, when Kenosha police officer Rustin Shesky fired 7 shots into 29-year-old Jacob Blake's back, paralyzing Blake and igniting a week of violent unrest. Afterwards, the violence reached the boiling point when 2 protesters were killed in Kenosha by Illinois teenager Kyle Rittenhouse last week Tuesday. Now, as the city looks to rebuild amid high tensions, Reverend Jackson says he hopes the community event will help bring Kenosha residents closer together. He also called for justice for the 2 men shot and killed by Rittenhouse.
About Jake being shot. It exposes inequality. So we cannot just be free, we must also be equal.
Blake's family friend and Kenosha resident Tanya McLean said the president only wanted to sow chaos and fear.
We know why Trump is here in Kenosha today. It is the same reason he visited Portland. He is here to sow chaos and fear. We reject these attempts to divide us. We will not act from a place of fear. We do not need more pain and division from a president who is putting his own re-election ahead of the needs of our city and the American people.
Among those in attendance was Justin Blake, Jacob Blake's uncle. Fighting back tears, he says the family had arranged for trauma counselors to meet with Blake's children and others who had witnessed the shooting. He also called for the police officer who shot Jacob Blake to be indicted.
So I'd like to be at home with my nephew and his kids playing and doing other things, but we don't have that opportunity today. So while we got the chance to tell you how much African descendants are hurting all around the world, because little Jake is everybody's little Jake. Conversations that African American families have to have with their loved ones before they walk out the door tells you it's just not a rogue cop, but a systemic racism that we're talking about.
The Justice for Jacob Coalition organized the event, which served as a celebration and called for community rebuilding. It featured free food, a voter registration booth, and more.
President Donald Trump's Kenosha visit came a day after he appeared to defend 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse, who was accused of fatally shooting 2 protesters last week in Kenosha. In a widely circulated footage taken before the shootings, Rittenhouse, who came to the protest armed with a semi-automatic rifle, said he was there to protect property.
A day before his visit to Kenosha, President Donald Trump declined to condemn the actions of 17-year-old suspects in the shooting of 3 protesters against police brutality in Kenosha, claiming that it appeared the gunman was acting in self-defense. President Trump gave a version of events that appears to diverge from prosecutors' accounts, saying Kyle Rittenhouse was trying to get away and would have been killed by demonstrators if he had not opened fire.
We're looking at all of it. That was an interesting situation. You saw the same tape as I saw, and he was trying to get away from them, I guess, it looks like, and he fell, and then they very violently attacked him, and it was something that we're looking at right now, and it's under investigation, but I guess he was in very big trouble. He would have been, he probably would have been killed, but it's under investigation.
Prosecutors have said Rittenhouse allegedly shot one man during a confrontation in the parking lot and was then pursued by protesters who attempted to disarm him. That is when he fell and then opened fire, killing the second man and wounding a third. He has been charged as an adult with 2 counts of first-degree homicide and 1 count of attempted homicide, and his lawyer has said he plans to argue self-defense. The incident occurred during the 3rd night of unrest following the police shooting of 29-year-old Jacob Blake, who was shot in the back multiple times at point-blank range. Demonstrators have accused outside agitators of violently hijacking their protests. Last weekend, Kenosha police said that 105 out of 175 suspects arrested during the arrest came from outside the city.
You're still watching Foreign Dispatches on Channels Television. In Sudan, the government and the main rebel alliance have signed a peace deal aimed at ending 17 years of conflict. The agreement covers key issues around security, transitional justice, power sharing, and the return of people who fled their homes because of war.
Sudan's government signed a peace agreement with major rebel groups on August 31st in Juba, capital of neighboring South Sudan, in a step towards resolving deep-rooted conflict from the long rule of ousted leader Omar al-Bashir. 3 key rebel groups signed the deal, including factions from Darfur, where more than 300,000 people are estimated to have been killed and 2.5 million displaced since 2003. By doing so, they've been promised political representation and devolved power, integration into the security forces, economic and land rights, and the chance of return for displaced people. And for Sudan's transitional unity government, it's a route to greater stability.
This peace agreement is very important for us in the transitional unity government because it leads to constitutional amendments, reforms in the security sector, and ensures peace and stability across all parts of Sudan. The only way to achieve complete political and economic stability of our country is by making a comprehensive peace agreement through a process like the one we have started now.
The Sudanese military-civilian government, which took power after the army overthrew the 30-year dictatorship of Omar al-Bashir in April 2019, has been holding talks in neighboring South Sudan since October last year, with large rebel groups operating under the umbrella of the Sudan Revolutionary Front.
We firmly believe that military solution to Sudan's internal conflict is not a viable option. As the leader of a country emerging from conflict, I must reaffirm our categorical rejection of the logic of force in resolving disputes.
The United States, the United Kingdom, and Norway have all welcomed the peace agreement as a first step in rebuilding stability in the country. However, in a potential hitch, 2 rebel factions within the Sudan Liberation Movement, SLM, and the Sudan People's Liberation Movement North, SPLMN, refuse to take part in the peace process.
Still on peace deals, high-level delegations from Israel and the United States have visited the United Arab Emirates via the first-ever commercial flight between the Middle Eastern nations to put final touches to a pact establishing open relations. Announced on August the 13th, the normalization deal is the first such accommodation between an Arab country and Israel in more than 20 years.
Senior U.S. and Israeli officials landed in the United Arab Emirates on Monday, August 31st, on a historic trip to finalize a pact marking open relations between Israel and the Gulf state. Delegates, who include President Donald Trump's senior advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and the U.S. National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, and his Israeli counterpart, Meir Ben-Shabbat, made aviation history when the Israeli commercial airliner flew over Saudi territory en route to the UAE. The plane carrying the U.S. and Israeli delegations to Abu Dhabi had the word peace written on it in English, Hebrew, and Arabic. Jared Kushner voiced hope for a more peaceful era in the region.
I believe that this agreement has the ability to change the whole course of the Middle East. For the last 3.5 years that I've been working on different issues in the Middle East, there's been a lot of sense of hopelessness. The last decades we've had conflict and war and division, and what happened here was 3 great leaders came together and they started writing the script for a new Middle East.
At the end of the two-day trip, Israel and the United Arab Emirates agreed to set up a joint committee on financial services cooperation with the aim of promoting investment between the two countries. And in the light of a historic visit of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, spoke Hebrew with a United Arab Emirates official over a video call on Tuesday, September the 1st. They both voiced hope to see each other soon in Israel or the UAE.
While the deal is being lauded by the US, Israel and the UAE, other Arab countries are unimpressed. Iran's supreme leader describes the deal by the UAE as treason committed against the entire Islamic world and the Palestinians.
As a delegation of senior Israeli and US officials, including White House senior advisor Jared Kushner, President Donald Trump's son-in-law, concluded a historic trip to Abu Dhabi to finalize the UAE-Israeli deal, Iran's supreme leader calls the United Arab Emirates a move betrayal.
The stain of this shame will remain on those who did this deal forever. This is a betrayal. They acted in a way that is very bad. They've opened the way for the Zionists into the region. And the Palestinian issue, the taking of a country by force, making refugees of a whole nation.
The agreement to normalize relations brokered by the U.S. was made public in a surprise announcement on August 13. A deal pledges full normalization of relations between Israel and the UAE countries in the areas of security, tourism, technology and trade in return for suspending Israel's annexation plans in the West Bank. The Palestinians have fiercely opposed the normalization as weakening traditional Arab refusal to form ties with Israel before the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. That past Arab support was one of the Palestinians' few advantages in moribund peace talks with Israel. Palestinians have held public protest and burned the UAE flag in anger. The United Arab Emirates is the third Arab nation after Egypt and Jordan to establish diplomatic relations with Israel. Unlike the other countries, the Gulf state does not share a border with Israel.
And finally, the show must go on. That was certainly the case for the World Tango Championship, which had to take place online this year because of the coronavirus pandemic. Instead of competing in crowded dance halls, couples submitted video footage of them performing their intricate steps at home or in the street. Take a look.
Tango, with its passionate cheek-to-cheek dancing, has taken a hit during the coronavirus pandemic, with dance halls shuttered and people practicing social distancing. But Buenos Aires World Tango Championship took the competition online to keep up its annual tradition. Instead of competing at the Luna Park Stadium in Buenos Aires, where the event has been held each year since 2002, competitors were required to send a video of their dances to the organizers. Winners of the competition's various categories were announced Sunday, August the 30th, with Brazilian-Argentine pair Luis Junqueira Malucelli and Marcos Esteban Roberts winning the Salon category, and Colombian pair Diana Franco Durango and Valentin Arias Delgado winning the stage category. For Delgado and his dance partner, the championship offered an escape from the coronavirus pandemic.
We wanted to participate because we wanted to feel something different and for people to think about something different for a few moments that wasn't the crisis which is affecting all of us, especially us artists.
The Salon category is considered the more traditional style compared to the stage category, which is known for flair and flamboyance. For winner Marcus Roberts, taking part in the virtual competition just wasn't the same.
This is the first time that we've been in a virtual competition, and we are trying to adjust to today's world, and hopefully this is the first, the only and the last online competition, because tango is people, tango is community. Dancing alone isn't the same.
Among the finalists were couples from Argentina, Colombia, the United States, Russia, Italy and Norway. More than 91,000 people from the general public voted online to crown the champions.
And that's Foreign Dispatches today. Don't forget you can keep up with all our top stories on channelstv.com. Thanks for watching. I'm Teniola Shobowale. See you next time.